Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Saloni, for that generous introduction. Just one maybe correction, it's not two books, I've done 7 books on Pakistan, so I, I would like to take the credit for that. But anyway, that's on a lighter note. All of them are in Pakistan because it's a never ending mess and there is never a dearth of areas which you have to write on. So, good evening to all of you, and a very good evening, Ambassador Bisaria. Um, it's a delight to be with you once again here and, talking to you about the fantastic book that you have produced, of which Saloni has given a elaborate introduction. The book gives a very gripping account of the diplomacy from both sides. It's written from a practitioner's point of view, and it's rather a unique book, which discusses the compulsions of Indian policy. Very interesting anecdotes, interesting untold story. It makes a very excellent, I mean, it's an excellent reading. Now, Ambassador Bisaria, obviously, we have heard he carries an extremely rich experience. But to my mind, what is really fascinating is that he was in Pakistan at the time which has been the defining period in the relationship. In 2016, yes, we stopped diplomatic dialogue with Pakistan after the Pathankot attack. And in 2018, I think Ambassador Bisari, it was 2017 you went there. And 2018, in his book, he writes that he could sense some optimism in the environment. Army Chief Bajwa talked about the famous Bajwa doctrine. He was talking about linking up with with the region, having a geopolitical and geo-economic landscape, which kind of helps in the growth of Pakistan. So there were these feelers. But in 2019, we have Pulwama, 40 of our men get killed. And then the Balakot strike, India's military retaliation to the act of terror, very clear messaging from India that Pakistan's act of terror will have a cost. And India is no more going to be observing a so called strategic restraint, and it's not going to respond to it with diplomacy. And that's when we have the attack back, and then we have abrogation of Article 370, as a result of which both the high commissioners from both countries go back. We've just heard trade completely gets stopped by Imran Khan. And now we have 5 years after that where we are standing at a very different phase with no diplomatic dialogues open, extremely narratives of hate, the exchange which goes on. And it gives a very, very pessimistic, feeling about the whole situation. Now, before I begin my conversation with Ambassador Bisaria, just what is happening in Pakistan right now. It's in a crisis state, and it's always been actually in a crisis state because 25 years back, when I started my scholarly journey, I used to attend the conferences with the titles called, Is Pakistan Failing? Will Pakistan Break Up? 25 years of my journey, and still we hear the same. Titles, the conferences with the same titles. So they have undergone a long phase of political uncertainty. The economic crisis is very acute. The debt is close to 80% of the GDP, 30% inflation. It's on a constant drip of external assistance because it's in a debt coma all the time. Military's image has been tarnished, and the society and institutions are polarized because of Imran Khan's popularity and the supporters which have been there in the country. So you have seen that there is crisis from all domestically, and then it has also lost its strategic relevance after the US has exited Afghanistan. So I'll begin, Ambassador Bisaria, by asking a question about the state of Pakistan. So in your book, you write in your introduction, um, India and Pakistan, as indeed the counters of the border relationship, appear to be determined by an overarching factor, Pakistan's quest for identity. The quest has played out most visibly along two axes of contestation, territory and security. Now, in your view, how has this quest for identity in Pakistan shaped the state of Pakistan, its power dynamics, its strategic objectives? And do you think Pakistan has managed to create that sense of security after 75 years of striving for it?
Thank you. Thank you. Great question, Shalini. Thank you very much. Very good evening. Great to be here. But first, let me just give a shout out to Quorum. Thank you very much for organizing this, giving this platform. And thank you for all friends who are here today. I see many familiar faces, many friends from Gurgaon who refuse to come to Delhi, saying it's too far. And I'm glad some of them have made it today. And Saloni, thank you for remembering the past. My accidental entry into the bureaucracy curtailed my media career. So I'm glad that you remembered and you were the producer of my first few kind of attempts at voiceover. Uh, but Shalini, to your very serious question, let's come to that. But before that, let me just respond to your what you talked about Pakistan today. So I often, with a corporate audience, like to give a corporate analogy of what Pakistan is. And if you were an investor in today's Pakistan, which you could call hybrid Pakistan, a civil military hybrid, you would fire the board of directors because if you have to give you were the IMF, you're considering an $8 billion loan. Pakistan has come up with these proposals. You would have serious doubts about this board of directors that has run the company for 75 years. And who's that board of directors? That is the Pakistan Army. The Pakistan Army chief today is the chairman of the board. He is the CEO. He runs the whole show. They get a nominal chief operating officer, which is the prime minister. In this case, it is Shehbaz Sharif. It used to be Imran Khan. But what they do is that they jail or kill or exile the former managing directors who do a bad job and and put all the blame on them. So we have a situation where we have a sinking company because there's no business model. You're spending more than you're earning in revenues. You're importing more than you're exporting in a sustained way. You've gone for your 24th IMF program, which is an emergency kind of rescue package of $8 billion. This is the 24th extended fund facility that they would go in for from the 1st of July. They had a standby arrangement which was in place. So today's Pakistan is going through what we are calling a poly crisis. It is certainly, firstly and most importantly, a huge economic crisis. And only because the three godfathers of Pakistan have stepped in, which is Saudi Arabia, China, and the United States. The United States helps them unlock the IMF loan. China has given some direct loans, and Saudi Arabia is dragging its feet but needs to give about $5 billion of investment. A first rate economic crisis because essentially the army has controlled a large part of the economy and mismanaged it in a big way. It continues to see itself as part of the solution, whereas it is part of the problem. It is trying still to manage that economy, but it also has a huge security crisis and a huge crisis, a political crisis, because the legitimacy of the army has been challenged also from within and by Imran Khan, the jailed former PM who just refuses to go away. So he continues to be an important force. On the 8th of February, they had a sham election which was very flawed and which was engineered heavily. If it was free and fair, Imran Khan would have won two-thirds, even a two-thirds majority, but it wasn't fair, and therefore the Sharif brothers are in power. So I think with that, let's flash back to your question about, and I start my book with an essay on the fundamental problem, which is the cause for the India-Pakistan rift, and that is Pakistan's identity crisis. And it manifests itself along several vectors. So the identity crisis at foundation was, who are we? Are we Arab? Are we South Asian? Are we the other of India? Or are we a Islamic nation that existed from 716 when the first Arab Mir Qasim came to the subcontinent? So there was an identity crisis which they started putting into, which defined Pakistan's official narrative. And the vectors on which it worked were security and territory. So, part of the identity, as defined by Pakistan's leaders, the military leaders in particular, was Kashmir banega Pakistan. We are incomplete without the territory of Kashmir, and therefore that is our identity. We need it. And all that suffered a huge blow with Bangladesh 71 because half the country went away. It was also Islamic, but it just refused, it went away because ethnicity was more important than religion. And the Bengalis didn't accept the racism of the Western Punjabis, and that was part of the reason why Bangladesh simply split apart. So, territory was an issue. Security was an important issue because the way Pakistan's army defined itself to its people was that we have this dangerous neighbor, India, which refuses to accept our reality, that wants to take over, and therefore you need an army to run your state, which is the only functioning institution. And pretty much the every decade or so, the army from the back office came to the front office to take care of things directly. A dictator ran Pakistan 10 years, every 10 years. And even now, I would argue, Musharraf left in 2008, and what we have today in 2018 is a hybrid regime. The army decided that for international legitimacy, we need to be, we can't take over because then the IMF loans and everything else will dry up, but we control the situation from behind. So I think that is the reality, that it was an identity crisis. It continues to be one. But the difference is that now people are beginning to see through the game. The people of Pakistan are beginning to see that, this cola that they've been given all these years is not the real thing.
Thank you so much. You've talked about 1980s in detail in the book. Under Zia, you have discussed how Pakistan changed Islamization of the army, Islamization, I mean, the Islamist laws being more stringent, radicalization in Pakistan. And then you have written that you know about a new troop that defined Pakistan, which is Allah, Army, and America, which you call America. So at present, what we see that all these three pillars are weak. Army obviously image has been tarnished by the Imran Khan, his supporters. Bajwa was called Mir Jafar. That's never happened in Pakistan. One is that the reputation, and second is that we have this a fatal military organization called Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is called the TTP, which has been targeting the military personnel repeatedly and very, very aggressively. Close to about 40 men per month have been dying in Pakistan, the security personnel. And then the TTP is also demanding to implement Sharia in Pakistan. And then you have America, where the security assistance is not there anymore. Pakistan has been keen, but the US equipment is not coming. So now with these pillars not at the same strength, what do you think are the defining pillars of Pakistan now? Obviously, China is playing a big role. And how do you what do you think holds Pakistan?
I think the answer to that is clear. It still is the army. The army is the force that is keeping it together, that is running that country, that has been the cause of all the crises that Pakistan faces. But you talked about the Zia era, and the 1980s was a defining time for Pakistan. It could have gone in any direction, but internally, Zia Haq was the third dictator. After Ayub and Yahya Khan had been discredited in the for what they did in the 60s and early 70s. And Zia tried to define and gain legitimacy for the army and this second coup by co-opting the religious right, and hence the trope about army, Allah, and America. And the US came to the rescue because soon as Zia took over, as luck would have it, the Soviets walked into Afghanistan. And therefore, you needed Pakistan was needed as a hired gun by the Americans to for defeating the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and therefore Zia became a useful fool to have as a tool in their arsenal. So, what really happened in that time was that he led Pakistan in a very regressive way by going backwards. In from India's point of view, he did a great deal of damage because he didn't fight a war with India. But what he did after 71, it was clear that the conventional differential was very strong. And therefore, he did two things. One, run a proxy war, and he started this campaign in Punjab, for which we had no answer. We weren't even sure at that point whether it was Pakistan behind it. Now it's proven. And he developed the nuclear weapons. And the Americans knew about it, but they didn't sanction him because they needed him for Afghanistan. So I think, but if you fast forward to 2024, it is the army. They face a weak challenge from the civilian politicians who still find it useful to use the army to come to power, and a weak challenge from the judiciary because the army, basically the army, if you were in Pakistan today, would have every call you make would be going into some computer because it bugs everything, it tapes everyone, including the prime minister, the judiciary, and you blackmail them and you keep the judiciary in your control. So there is a weak challenge right now, but I think it is the army that continues to be the main pillar.
I agree with you because it's the army which highlights that threat perception and fetches the support from the Muslim world as well. And then obviously Pakistan has always leveraged its geopolitical location, which has been a big plus for Pakistan. Coming to the army's narrative, we have seen that there is the anti-India narrative in Pakistan, the highlighting of the threat perception, projecting India as a hegemon, often claiming that India wants to disintegrate Pakistan. In your personal capacity, while you were there, what do you think the power centers in Pakistan, which is the military, mullah, civilian leadership, uh, what do they think of rise of India? How do they view the way India has conducted itself? So there are two different emotions that you see. There is an anti-Indian narrative, there is a hate, but on the other side, there is also this desperation to be on par with India. So how do you see these two emotions simultaneously, and what are your comments on that? Yeah.
I think it's a very important paradox which expresses itself in multiple ways. So, what often happens is that the admiration for India sort of peaks out when you talk about when you see social media. There is a lot of talk about it. There is also an understanding in Pakistan's policy circles that the power differential is now huge. You have an economy of $340 billion growing at 1% or shrinking compared to a $3.7 trillion economy growing at 8%. So it's an 11x differential in military capacity, in national capacity, in comprehensive national power. And therefore, there is an understanding of that. And there is a desperate attempt at promoting a narrative, like the gutter inspectors report, bringing out the worst in India of the kind of things that go on. But the people are beginning to see through it because if you see the podcasts by young influencers, they're talking to each other, they're watching what is happening in India, and they're seeing the G20, they're seeing the moonshot, they're seeing the UPI, and they feel that they are being deprived of that by their government.
Wonderful. Um, I also want to ask you about the tensions between the two countries because, yes, the book covers detail about the diplomatic interactions, but and what we saw in your book also that we have spent decades, on this whole positivity, having some hope, optimism, waiting for Pakistan to change, different ambassadors, diplomats giving them chances, prime ministers giving them chances. But now India stands at a very firm position of zero tolerance on terrorism. We are very, very clear that terror and talks will not go together, and we remain very firm on that. But on the other side, despite the absence of the diplomatic dialogue, we have a ceasefire agreement which we signed in February 2021 that stays intact despite the miscalculated, BrahMos launch. And then we also have the Kartarpur diplomacy, which is continuing. So now it seems to me like a stable state of tensions. And the general perception in India that you see is that Pakistan is not important, China is a bigger threat, which I don't agree. And but for the sake of audience, I would like to hear your views on that. You've talked about three scenarios: business as usual, conditional pessimism, conditional optimism. How critical, according to you, is the need to engage with Pakistan?
Yes, I think it's a great question. And when we analyze Pakistan, we all seem to agree. But when we talk about policy towards Pakistan, India is very divided. And even in policy circles, people have different views. In my view, a policy of strategic neglect of Pakistan is not a wise policy. It's a country which we fought 4 wars, which is nuclear, 250 million people at our border. And strategic neglect would be as dangerous as Israel's strategic neglect of Gaza, which got them the 7th of October. You assume that this problem I've solved. Let me get on with other problems like Israel did. Let me do the bigger deals in West Asia, and I'm beyond Gaza. Gaza is a contained issue. But guess what? It happened. You can have a scenario where POK is taken over by the Jaish-e-Mohammed in a breakdown of Pakistan, and that would be a hugely dangerous situation for us. So, if I was advising the Prime Minister, I would advocate a two-track policy of the kind we have now evolved after 2016 surgical strikes and Balakot airstrikes, which is a tough zero tolerance posture on terrorism, which means that the strategic calculus of Pakistan now understands that Pulwama will get a Balakot plus response. So, we will escalate. Uh, on the act of terrorism, there won't be any strategic restraint, and that's a given. But along with that, we can have a calibrated engagement. And I would advocate a posture where we talk to the army. So, for instance, just 2 days ago, Nawaz Sharif, it was in the headlines, says that we made a huge mistake in 99. Kargil was a mistake. And, it's a mea culpa, which he publicly admits. And I see in that two signals. One is a signal internally to his army that, look, you guys threw me out twice, once in 99 and once in 2017. I'm back as the president of the party. Don't try this again because, the world knows that you were responsible. But it is also a signal to India that, he says, I invited two Indian prime ministers. 99 February, Vajpayee goes on what was possibly the biggest in this relationship peace gesture by India, that he just goes across 1 year after the two countries had gone nuclear, saying, let's do a strategic reset. Let's talk. We are both nuclear now. Let's not worry about each other. But then Pakistan does Kargil because, again, it's a sort of discredited misadventure in Pakistan. All their writings, as you know, are saying that it was a huge mistake. But nevertheless, they did it, and they had a Kashmir adventurism under the nuclear umbrella, and they had also the terrorism under the nuclear umbrella. 2001, 2008, Mumbai. So it didn't quite work the way it worked for the US and USSR. It was supposed to give strategic parity and therefore strategic stability. But Pakistan decided to use it uh, to try and escalate in the non-conventional space by using terrorism. So I think now India's posture is clearly that of zero tolerance to terrorism. But objectively, now the conditions, Nawaz Sharif's statement, we've gone 5 years without terrorism or major terrorism like Pulwama, even though we have some minor attacks. We have gone 4 years with a ceasefire. We have the Kartarpur corridor working. We have feelers from Pakistan that they want to start trade. So I think a calibrated engagement with the Pakistan army. So we, even if the civilians tell us that we want to do a deal, we ought to be confirming that deal with the army because we don't want it to go the way it went twice earlier, both in Vajpayee's time and in Modi's time, that we made a gesture, but the army was not on board, so we couldn't sustain it.
So I'm really tempted to ask that engaging with the army that you said, because what we have been hearing and also, assessing that with this hybrid regime, the real power anyway lies with the army. So even if you are talking to the civilian regime, he will not do probably without the consent of the army. And there are three areas which Pakistan military controls very tightly. That's the nuclear weapons, defense budget, and its policy vis-a-vis India and Afghanistan. Uh, but if we directly talk to the military, what do you think happened to the people sentiment there, which is very anti-military right now? And do you really talk about, or are you a supporter of people to people contacts there? Because we also hear a lot of talk around that we should encourage people to people contacts between India and Pakistan, although I feel it needs to be a step by step approach. But one is that what is the effectiveness of those people to people contacts? And second is that if we engage with the military, how do you see that emotion being impacted?
I think it's a great question, but it's important to calibrate what we're doing. So, what I would advocate, we are talking ostensibly with the civilians, but we should have a back channel, quiet channels with the army to make sure what the civilians are saying has the blessings of the supreme leader of Pakistan. Because twice when Vajpayee went, Musharraf said, "It's just hot air. Why has this guy come?" And when Modi went, I was told by the ISI and a few other people that, oh, it was a gate crash. Why did he come? So according to them, they are entitled to invite, they are the only ones who can sanction an invitation to an Indian leader. If a prime minister of the day invites him, he's without their permission. It's wrong. So therefore, I think we should be real about it and have, we don't need to do it publicly. We need to have confirmation that through a channel, and we have those channels, that the army is on board. So on people to people, again, it's an important tool for diplomacy. It is an important reservoir of goodwill. But at the end of the day, when we are making policy against a country that has fought wars and exported terrorism, I'm not worried about the 95% people who don't matter. The 5% guys who decide on launching those missiles are the ones we should be first engaging with. It's an additional tool, the diplomacy and talking to young people. I would advocate that, but we shouldn't confuse that for the real thing, which is doing the deals with the army and the civilians.
Thank you so much for those fantastic comments, and I'm sure all of you are feeling enriched. So we'll just open the house for any questions now. You can just introduce yourself and ask whatever you wish to. Yeah, please, sir.
You talk about recent Miyatafa by Nawaz Sharif. What do you attribute that to? Is it is it just trying to gain public sympathy, or genuinely trying to build some relationship? This has been Nawaz's narrative for a while. Don't forget that he is coming after 6 years in the cold. He was out, and even after this election, where he couldn't get the mandate to be a prime minister himself, he is now making a political comeback. So when he arrived in Lahore in October, in the first rally that he spoke in Lahore, he also said exactly the same thing, although he didn't say Hamara Kasoor tha. He didn't really accept the blame, but that is going a step forward. So I think he said it in the context also of 28th May, which was the day in 1998 that Pakistan exploded 5 bombs in reacting to what India had done in terms of going nuclear and going overtly nuclear. So he was celebrating that day. He was taking credit for it legitimately. He was the prime minister of the day who ordered the tests, or they happened under his watch. So he was making the point that I did the tests, I got Vajpayee, and I would have had a great deal with India, but uh, they didn't let me do it because they threw me out of power, and the army. So I would say it was a signal. Firstly, also to the army, because they are the senior partner in the current hybrid government, that look, there are limits to which you can push us. We are not completely your puppets, the Sharif brothers, but also a signal to India. And various ways of reading it, but I would read it and I would want to reconfirm that he's saying, can we turn the clock back to 1999? When Vajpayee had come, that was the most promising visit ever in the relationship. We signed a Lahore declaration saying, let's discuss Jammu and Kashmir bilaterally and so on. So, is he signaling we'll go back? But that is his posture. Now, the problem is whether his bosses agree with that posture and whether they're on board.
So, what's your perspective of Pakistan as a society, stability of the society with the churn and impatience with the economic progress or lack of progress they are going through, plus the fact that they are on a bailout again? Will it be to 48th bailout someday, or will it be a? Do you see any chances that they will become another self-sustaining economy?
So, very unlikely given the current body language of the policymakers. What is happening is that they are going for the 24th program, but there is no model. No, they have these state-driven models. They've made an SIFC, a Special Investment Facilitation Council, including the army, where they say, come and invest. But there is no serious situation. And when I used to talk to the IMF teams, I would ask them, why don't you advise them to do what India did? We had our back to the wall in 1991, but we did 10 years of sustained reforms and more than 30 years of reforms, incremental reforms, to strengthen our economy. What Pakistan really needs is 10 years of strong structural reforms. It 3 years won't be enough. It needs 10 years. But part of that structural reform is getting rid of the army, which is in the economy. So, of the $350 billion economy, $20 billion it controls directly. Uh, Exactly. So $20 billion directly, $100 billion indirectly. Everything from barrier townships to chemical, chemist factories, to making soaps for television and soaps for detergents. A lot of the businesses with them, and they still don't see themselves as part of the problem. They see themselves as the solution, and which is the problem the IMF has. And in my conversations with the IMF, I would always tell them the first structural reform you need to tell Pakistan is, please ask your army to back off, which they won't do. They would say that that is political. That's not our brief.
I'll just add a point here. Also the defense budget of Pakistan, it's enormous. And that's one part is the officially declared defense budget, which is a one-line budget. And then there's the actual spending. And the most significant part of this whole issue of defense budget is that the acquisition of the military equipment is not part of the budget. And still it is a very big budget. And the military spending has been at the cost of neglecting social sector. That's been Pakistan's problem. Yeah, that's the Can we have the next
So the
question?
land business and the drug business, they have innovative. They are part of the global drug mafia, the Pakistan Army, and they are making they make a lot of money there and fill the gaps with all kinds of, let's say, innovative deals.
And just on a lighter note, there was a joke which used to go there when one of the generals was asked that, "Sir, what do you think of the F-16s?" The army general was asked. He said, "If it's a corner plot, buy it." Okay, the next question. Yeah.
Hi, sir. I'm Vikas. Very enlightening. Thank you. Very few people who could soothsay where we could land, say, 10 years down the road. Do you see hope that we could coexist peacefully together?
Well, hope can't be strategy, but hope is essential to make that strategy. So I talk in my book in the end of what Shalini mentioned, three scenarios. So it's a base case, optimistic, and pessimistic. Let's say the base, the bull, and the bear. And in the bull scenario, what we hope happens is that Pakistan realizes its abnormality and tries to normalize itself, which means normalize itself by a lesser role with the army, better economic management, and normalize itself through not exporting terrorism to its neighbors. Incidentally, all its neighbors are now pointing out that Pakistan has exported terrorism, whether it's Iran or Afghanistan or the distant neighbor United States. So I think something is changing within Pakistan. It has to be watched closely because the army is also fractured within. The urge of the chief is not to listen to that army. They want to stamp out dissent, so they do a purge. And there have been purges going on for the last 1 year in different parts of the army, corps commanders being changed and so on. So anyone who felt that maybe we are not doing the right thing is immediately dispatched. But what we may not have immediately is a strategic reset in the relationship. But what we should endeavor in our diplomacy and leadership is stability. And that could come through some low hanging fruit that we could talk about. Serious assurances on terrorism not being used as an instrument of state policy, and on things like trade and perhaps cricket. So we could go on with low-hanging fruit package, but the one of the problems is that Indian political leaders now see a huge political risk in peace with Pakistan because you do it and you get an answer in a terrorist attack, so why should I risk it? So, but I think it is important to continue engaging with this problem, coming up with the best solution. Immediately, our aim is to ensure that it doesn't become a terrorism exporting geography.
I guess I should have maybe framed it a little bit differently. Do you see probability of stability? I mean, I understand hope probably is, yeah.
Yeah. So I've been arguing that 2024 is a year of cautious optimism because you have the twin coincidence of elections in both countries. Pakistan was incoherent completely. Even now, it's quite confused, but it was incoherent before that election. So Pakistan has had elections. India would have had elections next month and a new government in place. And new governments, perhaps 3.0, Modi 3.0, is a time for a fresh look at that relationship. And the objective conditions are positive, but we can go ahead with some smart diplomacy and some good leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Manu. I'm Manu Kapoor. I have a simple question to ask. Well, whole Pakistan system, the whole fabric revolves around tracking the socio-economic and the geopolitical landscape within within the whole arena, and that's how the whole economy works because that's how they control the place. So, as an ambassador, what sort of a pressures you used to face, and how you used to mitigate those risks? Because because I've been to Pakistan few times, and whenever you'd go to Pakistan, every city I had to go to the police station first, enroll myself first, and then will move to the next level, and then people will keep tracking it. And I remember I used to live in Dubai. There, at least for few years after I left that job, I was still being, questioned by various authorities. Why did you go at India or various places? So, how, as an ambassador, used to mitigate that risk? Because whatever you speak, even you speak to your own heart, there is somebody tracking you. That's the way the fabric works. So, how used to manage those
The
risks?
book is full of those lovely
You know, so
stories,
there are
but
many
yeah.
stories I tell about that. But as an Indian diplomat in Pakistan, you do face a lot of, you assume that places that you don't check are tapped, your conversations are tapped, and they also, of course, put a camera to wherever you are. But you're not supposed to be saying things which can cause any trouble. So often we would be having conversations on an open line which we wanted folks in the spooks to hear. So it really doesn't matter. You just have to take care of some basic kind of precautions. You take some basic precautions, and it's a unique place to work in, because normally as a diplomat you have privileges, you have sort of special kind of conditions in which you operate. In this case, I had, for instance, 6 gunmen Pathans following me everywhere. I go for a walk, about 12 people walk behind me. So we get used to that tailing, we get used to those conditions. But also, the paradox of Pakistan is that when you're out in an evening at somebody's home, it feels like India. It feels like, especially kind of turbocharged hospitality, more than you would have in India. You must have experienced it in Lahore when the kebabs come out and the whiskeys come out. So I think that's one of the paradoxes. The people, there is a lot of lurking goodwill, and there is also a lot of lurking hostility.
Do we have time for the last question? Yeah.
Hi Ajay, I'm Sumer. I don't have a question, just a narrative. In the last 15 years, I've been to Pakistan some 20 to 25 times. The people just love us. They say, Aap bade bhai ho. They refuse to take money from us in the shops. They just won't take it. The the whole audience there just loves India. Everybody. And we went first time when the cricket match happened, which Vajpayee and Musharraf did. And thereafter, it's been a regular trips. The family has adopted us. I've become the eldest son. They've given a house key to me. They said, whenever you want to come, you come, this is your house. That's the extent of hospitality Pakistanis have for us Indians. Where do you think this is heading?
Yeah, so I think it's a great story, and you multiply this with so many other stories, and especially in the early decades when that partition generation was around, and they were meeting people, going to their old homes. So I think there is a great deal of cultural affinity, and this is a very strong part of the relationship. But you also have a situation where we fight those wars. And several paradoxes, 2 brothers, one was fighting for India, one fighting for Pakistan in the 1965 war. And we have, therefore, this cultural affinity even today. And it's a reservoir which we should recognize and perhaps deploy in our diplomacy. But the dealing with this country at a policy level has to be hard headed. My fundamental problem with Pakistan is that it's now a space that is exporting terrorism. So how do I control that? And no matter how much the people to people goodwill, the army, which is not influenced by those people, is running the show, and that has a different belief system. So I think we must recognize this people to people, and often we say that we need multiple Pakistan policies, and perhaps we should keep stoking these embers and use this sort of people to people connects. Hira Mandi today at Netflix is the most popular show in Pakistan. They love it, but they also love to hate it. They would say, everyone would have watched it, but they would say, oh, the Indians just don't get it. They don't understand our Lahore and understand our Hira Mandi. But, again, it's something to be respected, this goodwill. It is something for Pakistan's policymakers and leaders to note. It is something that also infects people like Nawaz Sharif. But unfortunately, he doesn't take the decisions. The decisions are taken by somewhere else in Rawalpindi.
So the most popular leader in Pakistan was not even allowed to fight the 2024 elections. So I think there's somebody at the back. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. So you said you are in favor of India should engage with Pakistan initially, you said, right? And then you also mentioned the risks attached to it. So how do you think that India can positively engage with Pakistan with some results? What should be the Indian government strategy framework, in your opinion?
Yeah, so if I was advising the Prime Minister, incoming one, I would say a two-track policy, zero tolerance to terrorism, and that is made clear to Pakistan. But a conditional and calibrated engagement. And part of that engagement would be verifying from the army what the civilians are telling you, when we have means of doing it by back channels and other channels, of making sure that Pakistan is in that space. But I would not advocate a policy where you don't engage with Pakistan at all and say, look, I have other problems. I have China. I need to deal with the United States. I'm not going to be talking to Pakistan at all. We're in no hurry. We should have the strategic patience, but we should be watching this neighbor very carefully and dealing with and engaging with this. And I think the time has come to consider some kind of calibrated engagement.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, please. Somebody at the back.
Ajay, just want to go back to a point that you had made earlier. You mentioned, the friendship part, which I think is part of the whole English elite system. You also mentioned something interesting, the lurking hostility, right? So is that something, also there in Pakistan among the uneducated, let's say the people who don't have jobs, the people who come out of the madrasas, people who, who only speak Urdu and who don't, maybe for want of a better word, say know anything better. And I'm wondering how does that impact the Pakistani army as a professional force or non-professional? I mean, what is the intake into the army from either side, the English-speaking elite or the, or the Urdu-speaking side?
Pakistan's army draws itself mostly from Punjab. And the point I'm making is, there would be pockets of people understanding, there would be pockets of connections, goodwill, the Muhajirs, for instance, who moved from India to Pakistan. But the official narrative, which is India as Dushman Mulk, most of the courses taught to the Pakistan Army are, I think about 80 to 90% are about India as the enemy. So, they are indoctrinated, the young officers from a very early age about India, the enemy. And Dushman Mulk narrative is very much the official narrative that India is our enemy. India has to be feared. India has to be, and we need an army to deal with it. So, but what happens is that official narrative itself is often rejected by the people who are beginning to question and reject the army. The Pakistan people are very sullen right now. both for the fact that they are going through such economic kind of challenges, and also because the army is running their show and not doing enough to change the situation, and the most popular leader is in jail. So I think the answer is that there is an official narrative which poisons the public perception, even though there will be several pockets of understanding the real India and not being influenced by that.
We have time for one more question if anybody has. Yeah, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Avi. What I wanted to ask you was, you've talked of this 11x differential and, the terrorism tool having been blunted over the last year or so. So is Pakistan now just trying to stay afloat, or are they planning something? What do you think? Because we've seen this, they've always surprised our country. What do you think is what is going on? Is just trying to stay afloat?
I think Pakistan is currently occupied with its internal problems. But I would say, as policy on the Indian side, we can't take our eyes off that ball, because surprises happen. 2004 to 7, 2003 to 7 was the golden era in the relationship. You would go to Lahore or for a cricket match, no one will take money. They'll say you're our guests, aapko kebab khilayenge. But 2008 we get Mumbai out of the blue. So we have to be prepared for a situation where you can suddenly get a Gaza October 7 situation of a major attack if you get lulled into some kind of strategic negligence. So I would say that as if you assess it as an assessment, I would say Pakistan is currently embroiled in its internal problems and also the problems on its west and its economic problems, and they don't have time or even the incentive to do something against India. There's a strong disincentive because India's reaction will be disproportionately strong. But on the other hand, as a policy from our point of view, we have to wargame a scenario where Pakistan acts irrationally and just uses this as a distraction to its problems.
Also, the economic. Sir, we'll have to shift to another question because we just have.
How is our intelligence? As per your assessment, how is our intelligence?
Sir, we haven't had an attack, so you have the answer there, right?
I think you can sleep peacefully.
We have one gentleman.
I'll go back to the previous point you made about the enemy state narrative. Doesn't the same exist in our country too? And so where's the actual middle ground and the reality?
Right. I think that is a debated proposition in India. There is also there are multiple narratives, including one which says they don't matter. There is one, the enemy state narrative, I think, is one that is diluted, that is not so often used because we talk about it, I think, in our public conversations as a smaller enemy that doesn't matter. Because speaking as a strategic analyst, I would say that our biggest strategic challenge right now is China and will continue to be. On Pakistan, I would say it is an irritant, but it is also a more minor strategic challenge. Now, what you're perhaps referring to is the conversation around elections and so on about what Pakistan does. I think that's a national security conversation because what happened in Pulwama, for instance, and the response in Balakot, that is the kind of narrative that you hear more. But again, in Indian discourse is divided. But I would say, in a policy sense, Pakistan is seen as the lesser challenge than China.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bisaria. So excellent points discussed today. Yes, there is hope because there is elections. We have like a fresh government on both sides, continuation on our side. There is, India can rethink. Pakistan is talking about rethinking. We have definitely have our position on no terrorism. We have carved out a space for military retaliation above terrorism and below the nuclear threshold. We remain firm on that. But what I could assess from your comments is that we remain firm on that ground on zero terrorism, but we still engage because we don't want a Gaza-like surprises coming up without an engagement. But also simultaneously, we have to be very alert and keep our eyes and ears open, and as in what's happening in Pakistan, what could be the next potential offensive if there is any. So thank you very much for all of you being here, and Ambassador Bisaria for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.